While we're waiting, we'll do introductions. My name is Luke McOmie. I am the Vice President of Offensive Security here at RedHelm. Been with the company for about 5 years and have worked exclusively in offensive security since 1994. Um, Today on the phone with me today, we have Ross, we have Craig, and we've got Jim. Uh, Ross Merritt works for us over on the offensive security team. Craig Carrigan is one of our VCSO advisors, and Jim Jancel is one of our favorite clients to work with from Carnegie Learning. We'll be going through and kind of talking with you today about instant response planning, tabletop exercises, and the way that we have found to do these tests in a way that's meaningful and valuable versus looking at kind of the static approach that the industry typically takes. Really, with why we're doing this is that the more research we do, the more clients we talk to, the more involved we get with helping people, we realize that there's quite an increasing complexity around the way that these security incidents are happening nowadays. Also, regulatory scrutiny is up. And then, really the biggest and most important thing are the impacts to the business. And where before a lot of times when we would see some of these incidents happening, it was something basic where somebody was being phished, maybe some sensitive information was getting out, maybe somebody was getting crypto locked and ransomware. But nowadays, the attacks that we're seeing are long going, that heavily planned, often multi-staged, and even nation state backed. So we wanted to jump in a little bit about how we do the work that we do and how it works. So as we're getting ready and getting ready to kick this off, you know, go ahead and answer in our Q&A section or in the chat. But let us know, does your organization have a documented incident response plan, and have you tested it in the last 12 months? If you want to share some anecdotes about your testing as well, please let us know. And then here in a few minutes, once we've had a chance for people to answer, we'll get kicked off with kind of stepping through and talking about the traditional instant response tabletops and how we do them a bit different. Craig, do you want to give a little bit of a introduction to your background and some of the day-to-day work we do?
Sure. I'm one of our VCSO advisors. So day-to-day working with organizations to talk about risks to the business, helping them align with various frameworks, and then putting in mitigations to controls to kind of close up those gaps, make them more secure. And one of those practices is certainly getting these tabletops in place so that we can more effectively view how IR is done, make sure that the IR process is as quick as it can be. That way we could limit threat, and then limit overall expense and downtime. So
Cool. Excellent. Ross, how about you?
Certainly. My name's Ross. I work on the offensive security side. I do a lot of pen testing, physical pen testing, as well as social engineering. My background, Marine Corps veteran, some time as a private investigator, and what's probably most relevant for the tabletops is I used to do a lot of improv and stand-up comedy. So I try and bring a little bit of levity with me.
Used to. I thought every single team call was your practice session still.
Hey, I'm still practicing for the big times. Netflix will find me one day.
Thank you both. How about you, Jim?
Jim Jancel, Director of Corporate IT at Carnegie Learning. Been at Carnegie Learning in some capacity since 2001. Started in the customer support department and then moved over to IT and desktop support, and then kind of just grew with the organization as it grew. It's interesting, this whole tabletop thing makes me think back to when we first started getting cybersecurity a few years ago, and just, how it's, like I was like, all right, I turned on multi-factor authentication, like we're golden. And then it just kind of like, oh, are you doing this? Are you doing this? And are you following best practices? Well, what are best practices? And, it's just, Ideal has been or I guess RedHelm now, since you did the change, you've been a very good partner to kind of help me through these things.
That's wonderful. We enjoy working with you as well. Well, I saw some good comments that were there that came through. We'll kind of touch on those as we go. And then, folks we see out in the audience, again, thank you for coming in and joining us. To get us kicked off, we're going to talk first about kind of the traditional way of doing tabletop exercises. It's interesting because in the industry, a tabletop test is not new, right? This is something we've been doing for a couple decades now. But we found we were hitting some walls, and we found that there were better ways to do it. Usually, the pre-assembled deck, the generic handouts that everybody gets, that kind of seems to be the norm right now. And we have seen some shifts, right? There's some good things out there. But why don't we talk through a little bit, with those of you on the panel, about what you've seen in the past, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and kind of, what we've been doing from a newer approach. Who wants to get us kicked off?
Yeah, I can talk to the generic decks. So, if you look at a generic tabletop exercise, right, it can only help you in the broadest sense. And a lot of times, a pre-canned deck will only get you so far. So you're not catering to your actual risks to the business. You're not catering to the actual impact, monetary, downtime issues, things like that. And then within that, you're missing your gaps, your misconfigurations. And so, and I don't know, Luke, if you want me to go on about, exercises with executives and things.
Yeah, go for it.
But
We've got time.
yeah, so, bringing in executives in our initial assessment helps us look at those risks, look at the monetary value, understand the business processes. And that way we can design a better, more structured program. And that really digs down into real threats, real things that can happen to really help you shore up that IT security.
I like it. I like it. Ross, I know that you have been in the loop kind of since the inception of this program. What are some of the things that we've done differently to move away from or get away from just the generic approach?
Certainly love to answer that. So with the generic approach and your standard kind of tabletop experience that I observed, it's, this happens. Do you make the correct answer or the incorrect answer? And it's very linear, very static. The real world's not like that. No plan survives contact with the enemy. Sometimes there's not a correct answer how to respond to something. And we really kind of looked at that and wanted to see how we could bring that into a tabletop, but still keep it good and engaging for the entire team. And, we took a lot of inspiration from role-playing games, kind of Dungeons and Dragons-esque tabletop, and some of my actual improv experience with games we've done around that. And we created a kind of a world where there are right answers and wrong answers, but you don't necessarily get to choose how it goes, adding kind of that actual chaos, element of luck, element of surprise into it, that we really hope, simulates more of what would happen in the real world, and we find it's a lot more engaging for the people involved.
I like it. I like it. We'll dig into that a little deeper too, to actually explain what we're doing and why it's different here in just a little bit. Jim, you and I had been talking, we had some notes here as well. You had talked about kind of the first time you guys did a tabletop and the value or not value that you got out of that. Do you want to kind of expand upon that a little?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, the value was we were able to check off a box and say we did it, for our SOC 2. The frustrating thing was, it was a company that we had been working with for over a year, and I thought that they had understood our setup, how we have, our single sign-on stuff, what our computers are, what our network is, we're distributed workforce, those kind of things. And so when we do the tabletop, they would be like zeroed in and it just, that didn't happen. So the tabletop the tabletop kicked off, they handed us the first question from their deck, and it was like, timeout. That doesn't apply to us. Are you trying to send us down this path, or are you trying to send us down this path? Because, it's two very different things. And, I want to have a successful tabletop. So we had to spend like 15, 20 minutes, figuring out where we were going and then reformat the questions so that we could kind of go that way. And it kind of, left a bad taste in my mouth for the rest of the exercise.
Yeah, I think that that's actually fairly common with the people that we talk to. A lot of folks say the same thing. We've been blessed enough because we're an MSSP and a security provider for so many other companies that, we often get pulled in. Our blue team or deaf team gets pulled in order to really help or assist, with the incident response or with the execution of the way that these are done. And it's a common thread that we see with customers is that, sometimes they're not as lucky as you, right? You figured it out on the first question. A lot of times people are halfway through the incident when they realize that it's gone far enough off the rails. It's just not applicable to their business. It's not applicable to their leadership or the style or the way that they function. And again, to your point, it checks a box, right? From a compliance or a legal perspective, you get to check that box, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's very valuable to helping mature your program.
Exactly. Like I don't feel like we got a lot out of it when we did that first one.
Yeah. Spend the money, check the box, but not see much return, right?
Right.
Okay. Well, one of the things that we do when we're really building these out to make them fit is that, Craig, Ross, the team, they'll sit down and they have a primary point of contact. Usually that's whoever the champion is of the incident response testing that we're doing. Often that is a technical lead or somebody within leadership. But then we also, as Ross mentioned before, we involve the executive staff literally right out the gate. We find that in order to get the support that we need to be able to demonstrate the return on the value and to be able to align it with the business effectively, we need to get them involved right at the start so that we get their buy-in, their support, and really an opportunity to acquire and gather as much of that industry knowledge or specific business intelligence that helps us design out the contacts. Ross or Craig, either way, when we talk about how we approach this, we usually do it with two campaigns. Can you kind of talk about the differentiator between those different campaigns and why we run them the way we do? Ross, I'll give you this one.
Gotcha. So with a tech-centric one, we know that our audience is a little bit more focused on the actual how-tos and what the system is, stress testers and that. Whereas when we bring in the business teams, kind of the full team, we want to be able to raise awareness for everyone at the company that, an IT cybersecurity issue doesn't just affect your IT department, it affects everything. So we really try and bring that to life. It's, yes, you can't get in the emails. Yes, you can't necessarily get information to your customers, but you've got to start looking outside of the building too. Does that create a media issue? What sort of real world problems does that cause? What other agencies and industries do you need to bring in? So one is very much a, how do we solve this problem? And the other one is very much a team building exercise that raises awareness throughout the rest of the organization of just how critical everyone's role is in a cyber incident.
Okay, well done. You got anything to add to that, Craig?
Yeah, just a little bit. When we talk about the business side, the technical side, I won't say is easy, but tech is prepared for tech, right? A lot of the times, the business, I won't say overlooks these sorts of things, but we're able to come in and present it in such a way where other questions are answered or not answered, right? And we can bring that as a gap. So, are there legal risks? How do you handle external communication? Could you handle a long period of downtime for a specific process? Do you have a workaround in place? So some things that might not have been thought through all the way, we can kind of bring those to light.
That makes sense. That's good. You know, we do these custom storylines, right? We sit down, we talk to the business, we understand, you know, who they are from a culture, a mission, budget, vision, you know, who the customer is, the way that they generate their money, right? These are all things that play into the business side. We also do the same thing with like technology threats, risks, and we try to align this with, you know, the different standards of the different guidelines that the customers are dealing with or facing. You know, a bit of a off the cuff question here, but what's one of the things that you guys find can often throw a wrench in the planning or the discussions that we've seen in the past before? That these types of initial meetings can be something that help kind of clean up and shore up. Do you guys have any anecdotes or discussions about that where things have gone kind of sideways or you've seen things be less effective than they should have been? Anyone can
Ross,
take
do,
that one.
Ross, do you want to take that? Have you seen it go sideways?
Yeah, I've seen it go sideways. It's always the eaches. It's you can do the research, you can think you can understand the company, you go in there with an idea, and you find out that your assumptions were wrong. And we all know what it is to make assumptions. But that's why I think kind of the initial meetings are such a valuable thing, is it lets you stumble into that and go back to the drawing board and create a better scenario, understand the company better, and get them a quality product, a quality tabletop that actually works for them versus, you know, just making those assumptions the entire way and showing up with a tabletop ready to go that doesn't actually address the needs of that organization.
Yeah.
My favorite one was I was doing a prep meeting one time and I had an idea. I had some stuff and I was like, you know, what don't you like about previous tabletops? Where do you want to see this one going? And the customer responded, I don't want us to have to ride horses anywhere, which was not something I'd ever dreamed of putting in a scenario or thought of putting in a scenario. And I had to get the whole backstory on why they were concerned about that being in the tabletop. But it's kind of the things that just come out of there like that.
That's awesome. What was it? Why did they think they needed to ride horses for some reason?
Yeah, I need the story.
In a previous scenario, they had the company that was performing their tabletop had decided that there had been a localized EMP attack and cars were not working, and they needed to get from one branch to the other. So horses were added in as a crucial part of the tabletop.
Yeah, you know, I'm not going to name names, not the client or the other company, but we did have a recent client that we spoke to that was telling us about previous tests that they had done, and an EMP was one of the scenarios that was a likely scenario that they had done. It kind of blew my mind, right? Like the likelihood of that attack, I think, is fairly small. Is it possible? Sure. Is there a million other attacks that would probably happen before an EMP? Yes. And I think that that's one of the other things that we really try to focus on when we're building these scenarios is that we want to look at things like the likelihood of the attack, the industry that this attack is going to be happening within. I think one of the other things that's always been fairly successful is just even talking to the clients about previous compromises that they've dealt with, right? Be it phishing or, you know, somebody walking in and stealing a device and walking out the door, whatever it is. Those types of discussions really do help us shape these scenarios to where they make as much sense as possible. You know, we talk about the importance of assigning clear roles and responsibilities when we conduct these tests. You know, Craig, can you kind of talk us through a bit of what that looks like and why we do that?
Yep. So I guess I'll say really it's about bringing executive level and IT together to functionally talk about from the business side threats and risks that the business understands, and then IT engaged on how to react to those. And a lot of times we'll see that there's kind of a gap there where IT might think that they understand a risk to the business that doesn't have as much value to the business as they thought, where another process or workflow is a little bit more. So we try to bring in all the executive levels that we can across all the major process groups to make sure that what we're trying to look for and what we align with help solve the actual business process incident response.
It's perfect. Jim, do you have anything you want to add to this one as well?
Sorry, can you kind of
Yeah,
clarify the question?
really talking about the responsibilities around, assigning roles and making sure that as we're entering and doing the tabletop testing, that everybody kind of has their what do you call it, player sheet, Ross, where it's your roles, your responsibilities, your strengths, your weaknesses, that kind of a thing.
Right. I mean, I was gonna say, my team, because we knew it was coming. We
Mhm.
reviewed our playbooks and things like that we had created, and so we felt well prepared. But one of the things that when we started talking to RedHelm and about it, they were like, we want to get your finance team involved. We want to get your marketing team involved. As many executives as you could possibly get in here. We want them involved so that they can respond. And I'm not trashing or anything like that, but like, some things some people don't think about. So it was interesting, to have people from our finance and marketing team in there. And then, Ross, who led the tabletop, was all right, now here's, they're asking for, $1 million in ransom or whatever the exact number was. And then like, do you pay? And, so we asked, the controller, like, is that something we're going to pay? And then, she had to think about it. And, like, it was not a question that she'd ever, been on the spot. It's perhaps something she had thought about, but it felt more real world. It was less abstract and more real in that moment.
Right.
And also, certain other aspects of the tabletop when that was going south for us. We went to the chief marketing officer and was like, all right, what is your response? Do you alert your customers here? How are you going to handle that? And then he had all these questions and thoughts and was kind of, it was interesting to see him, think out loud.
Yep. No, that's cool. That's good. That it shows that connection, right? It's not just a rinse, wash, repeater reading something off a slide, but it actually engages people.
Right.
Let's talk a bit through the process. Craig, I'll start off with you. But when we talk through step by step how this gets executed and how it gets done, what does that look like? What's our first step?
Absolutely. So we start off getting as many core executives involved. So we make a committee, um, and that'll include those executives, parts of IT, as many as you can, and and then we start through an interview process. So we go through the business. We talk about your risks, your processes, your known threats. We bring up threats that might not be known, that we know about on our side. Current security controls, kind of try to understand the business as a whole, and then how you're currently trying to protect the business.
And how do you
Then,
gather that intel? Is that being done through like a series of interviews? Is it
yep,
handouts the client has to fill out? What does that look like?
yep, series of interviews. So either one or two. So either one longer one or kind of one executive and one technical. That'll depend on the size of the organization. And then we take that info, gather it up, um, look for a couple scenarios, and then we start building out the skeleton. So we build out the two that we talked about earlier, the executive level and technical, and we branch those off. We look at different areas that we could branch into as questions are answered, different threats that we've discussed. Make sure to hit key processes. Um, and then Ross takes it away once we have the skeleton done, and he works his magic there.
And that's something that cannot be overlooked. Like, so for those of you who haven't done this with us before, I'm an old guy, so this reminds me of the Choose Your Own Adventure books from when I was a kid, right? You read through, and then you've got to make a choice, and based upon the choice, it tells you which page to go to, and then that kind of changes the flow of the story. The younger kids, my children's generation, look at this, and it's very similar to some of the tabletop gaming, right? Where they're rolling a D20 die, which is something that we actually send our clients as a die to help participate with the way that we play through this. That helps create that randomness. But Ross, can you kind of talk us through, the value around how this stuff works, the how we run the tabletop and kind of what that looks like. I realize I kind of gave away a lead there by talking about the D20 die, but if you could, kind of explain to the audience a little bit greater in depth what that looks like or feels like as we go through that process, that'd be helpful.
Certainly. And this kind of gets back to what I alluded to earlier with it. We don't want it just to be a static, okay, here's the question of what's going on. It's on the slide behind me. If they answered this way, we go this route. If we answer the other way, or right or wrong, if you want to call it. We want it to feel like it's real and fluid. And
Mhm.
so that's part of it. And the other part is getting buy-in of everyone at the table, because if you're sitting there, and particularly if you're not IT centric, let's say you're human resources, you're comptroller, there's a lot of stuff that's not necessarily going to immediately involve you. How do we keep it engaging enough that you're still attentive throughout the whole mission to the point where we get to where you're involved? And we do that by making it kind of an actual gaming tabletop culture. The D20 dice, you might have chosen the right course of action for what it is, but life being life, is it necessarily going to work? That's where the dice comes in. We get the roll, 1 bad, 20 good, and we see where it lands, and we kind of go down a route based on that. That also keeps it from being repeatable. No two tabletops, even if it was the exact same scenario, were ever going to go the same way twice. And you really kind of get the attention, the involvement, everyone paying attention to see what the die roll is going to be, what's going to happen. I try and add a little bit of an element of storytelling into it as well. Again, to make it feel real, to keep it engaging, and to make it something that even if everything goes completely wrong and off the tracks, it's still a good experience and engaging, and everybody took something away from it.
Yeah, one of the things that I really liked, an example that we watched with a client was I think in their scenario they had like 5 hosts that had been detected as having like a compromise, right? They were trying to figure out, whether or not other machines or other hosts inside the environment could be done. And in your typical tabletop scenario, you've got 5 hosts infected. What do? Well, we pull the power, we isolate them, we pull them from the network. Next step, right? That would be the traditional way that a static deck would work. I remember when we were working through with that client that the conversation is, well, we'd pull the power and we'd unplug the computers and isolate them, and then they roll the D20 die and they get something like a 3. And it's like, okay, well, you isolated these 5 hosts, but it turns out that you had other infections within the environment. Here's where it's spreading. And again, it replicates, it makes it feel way more like a real incident when we play it this way, right? If they'd rolled a 20, they would have isolated it, they would have cleaned it up, and then it would have been next steps going through. But because of that die roll, it took them in a completely different direction. And the big discussion coming back from the client was how amazing it was that they found all these blind spots that they were unaware of because of the way this was playing out.
So just to tag onto that, very similar bad dice roll. And we said you can't find one of the servers. You don't really remember where it's at. And that actually led into the discussion of, do we actually know where all of our devices physically are in the real world, not just where they are on the network? And in that one, it was hidden in a closet. And, Ram said it's behind the Christmas decorations. You looked again, you found it. And everyone around the table started laughing because they actually had a room where all the office Christmas decorations were, and they lose things in there all the time. So it, again, kind of draws, parallels to the real world.
Yeah,
No, I love
mean,
it. This is great.
just if I can add real quick, the one thing from my experience, it was the complete opposite of dry. It was very interactive. It was very engaging. Like, Ross was a great dungeon master. And the one other thing about the dice rolls, he'd say something to us, and then we would ask a question, and he'd be like, well, let's see what the dice says. And he'd roll the dice, and he'd be like, hey, you're great, or hey, nope, sorry. And then, keep on going down the path of misfortune. So, it really made it spontaneous, spontaneity of it. And it was impressive.
That's awesome. That's good to hear. And Jim, you just got a question from the audience. Somebody asked, how did you get participation from the wider team, like your controller and the marketing head, like you mentioned? There's always competing priorities. What was the thing that made it to where they bought in?
Uh, I would like to say it was just my charm. Uh, you know, I have a pretty good relationship with the chief marketing officer, and the controller. And I mean, I guess the thing is, I try to be always, the face of at least the corporate side of security. Sending out emails. We do frequent security awareness trainings, things like that. Send out emails, or if there's a particularly bad phishing email that's going around, like I'll send out an email and things like that. And so, um, I don't pop up once a year and saying, "Hey, we're doing this tabletop. It'd be great to have you." There are multiple points of contact throughout the year where I'm talking to these people about various things. And so, like, when the chance for a tabletop comes up, I'm like, "Hey, we're doing our annual tabletop. I'd love to have you sit there." And, one of the other things that, I felt important that kind of relates to the tabletop is previously to this tabletop, I had reached out to them and said, "We're working on our business continuity plan. I need people for you to designate as this." And they're like, "Well, what's that?" And I say, in case of events, et cetera, et cetera. And, this is related to a lot of, cyber insurance policies, they want you to have this kind of thing. So, like, the seed is kind of always germinating it in their head to, think of these things.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. That kind of leads us into the next one too, which is the real world experience around this. When you went through this, and you've done both, right? You've done the statics and you've done this dynamic approach that we take now. Kind of, if you can share the journey of what it was like before and after, taking this newer approach.
Gotcha. So, it started off and we scheduled a couple calls with Ross and a few other people on the team. And, it was just an informal Q&A. Tell me about this, what's important to you? How do you do this, et cetera. And then, we'd answer the questions, spend, a few extra minutes, like going down a rabbit hole and things like that. And then Ross went back and, worked on the tabletop. I had exercise in his mind. And then about a week or so before the actual date, it was like, "Hey, this is what I'm thinking." He kind of at a high level, he didn't tell us exactly what was going to happen. And we said, "Yeah." And I said, "As a matter of fact, we've had this other situation recently that popped up. It'd be great if you could kind of work that into it as well." And he took, some key aspects of that and added into it. And so then, the day of the tabletop, we were there and, went through it. And like I said, it was interesting to see the looks on the face of the controller and the chief marketing officer and, see them think and see them engage. And the chief technology officer was there and he was, very excited to participate, and, ask questions and things like that. And the things he said, like, "Well, we have this plan," or things like that. So, like, see him engaged was cool. Uh, and then, we had, quick little wrap up after that. And afterwards, I got a nice little executive summary from Ross, where it outlined, like what we did right, what we did wrong, key areas of improvement so that I could, take that to my, CEO, my COO and say, "This is what we did. This is where we're at," like, um, shows you what we're working on and things like that.
Yeah, you talked about the fact that the first tabletop you guys had done was, without us, was fairly unrealistic, right?
Yes.
And that they dropped. What was that situation like?
You mean what was the exact situation or what
Yeah,
was
like
the
what
I'll
was
drive
the
with?
scenario when you said that something was unrealistic? What was that scenario that they
It
told you
was,
on
it
after?
was, that we use Google for our single sign-on, as our IDP. And we're a Salesforce customer. And so it started off with your Active Directory is down and people can't get into Salesforce. And I'm like, okay, those two systems don't talk to each other. Like, so are we under like an ID attack, or is it something like we're talking a single sign-on thing and like I gotta get on it. And it just like it sucked the life out of it. And we had to basically like pivot and recreate and just kind of go from there. So uh and honestly, I don't remember anything else from the thing because it just started off so bad. So
Yeah, yeah. Again, it's that if I've read the book before, right, I can read it again, but I'm outside of picking up maybe a new word or two. It's not going to be super valuable to me.
right.
Uh, you also talked about before when we did the assessment, and Ross and Craig came in and helped you out. There were some things that you discovered, some blind spots or things that kind of got called out in the incident. What was that like? How was that valuable, or what were some of the things that really kind of jumped out to you?
I guess the one thing is, there's always pressure to do new things, to, like advance where you are. And I have kind of looked at it like landscaping, like, all right, you're going to go landscape your backyard and it looks great. Now you got to do the front yard. So then you spend next year working on the front yard, but you forget about the backyard. And then you got weeds and things are dying and whatnot. And um, so when you're coming here and you're like, Ross and Craig come in and they're like, show me your landscaping. And you're like, hey, here's how great my front yard looks. And then you turn around and you're like, hey, here's the backyard. And be like, oh, my water feature no longer works. Like, yeah, I kind of haven't thought about that. So I've got to do that. And, it makes you realize that you can't just always look forward. You have to look back at things that you did and you have to reevaluate and talk to people. And because that's another thing, staffing changes. And you're like, I set things up and I teach my staff how to do things. And then, we hire new staff and the statisticians are like, I would love to train them, like, great, happy you're showing initiative. But then when you start talking to them, you realize that how they remember something and how they do something may not be exactly how you want to do something. So it's nice to, have the conversations beforehand with Ross and Craig to even say, realize that you're not all on the same page. And what someone should be doing is not necessarily what should be done through no fault of their own. So that's, that was one of the most worthwhile things about, the pre-tabletop discussions.
I like it. That's awesome. There's a comment that came in here, and this person in our audience says their organization is a large school district. They had a cyber attack last fall, fall 2024. At the time of the attack, they realized that there was pretty minimal documentation. They really didn't have a lot in place to be able to deal with or handle this type of incident that went down. Now this person's tasked with really helping integrate disaster recovery, incident response, general risk, process documentation, etc. They're going to do a tabletop exercise this year, and they felt that it was an appropriate way to learn, if they've got kind of their ducks in a row, right? The T's crossed, the I's dotted. What are some of the guidance that you would give this person who's getting ready to kind of go down that process, Craig and Ross?
Yeah, so I would make sure to start with business impact. Business impact really drives all of these things. So understanding from all the business units how specific processes impact the business, making sure that you understand the full process that happens, all of the things associated. Then you can assign risk levels to those, how critical they are. And then from there, that can drive your risk assessment, and then you can cater your IR and DR kind of around those, so that you hit the critical ones first, right?
Yeah, Ross, anything you want to add to that?
So I find, when we're creating documentation on how we're going to respond, what the different things are, it kind of gets done in siloed and it gets put on a shelf and forgotten about. And so, Carnegie Learning, Jim's organization, was amazing. They knew their day-to-day operations. They had a lot of stuff on top of head. And it's always good to see that, but you get to some organizations that are completely unfamiliar with the fact that they even have documentation. And so a lot of it ends up being discovery of, well, we don't know how we're going to respond to this. Do you have a document? Oh, yes, we do. And so a lot of it actually is getting people to dust off that documentation, go back, see what it says, see if it's still relevant, see if it matches the documentation from another part of the organization. And it really becomes kind of a learning experience in actually going back to look at these things.
No, that's on point. I'll be a little snarky. A SANS template that you have done find and replace with organization name and your business name is not a valid incident response plan. It's a great way to get started. It's a great way to form the skeleton of what you want to build into your deck. But I cannot tell you the number of times that we go out to do an assessment with different organizations, some of which are quite mature and well funded. And we get in to look at their documentation, and you can tell it's literally a cut and paste template that's never been modified for their industry, for their specific business or need. It doesn't address any of these pain points or blind spots that we've talked about. Again, great place to start, but you've got to build something well beyond that. That's where we end up leveraging you, Craig, a lot. Is really going in as a vCISO advisor and helping organizations identify where those gaps are at, and really helping take their documentation and their maturity to the next step. We got a comment while we were answering that question from the person who had asked it, and they said that one of the big things that they had found was the egregious lack of documentation and leadership ownership around understanding the applications of the portfolio within the business. I would like to say that that's not a common problem, but unfortunately it really is, right? Most of the time when we go in and we have these conversations within organizations, the first thing that the executive council or group does is they just point at IT, going, it's their problem, right? As you guys have seen, more executions of this and have gone through several of these with different companies, where do you find it the easiest path or the easiest way to really get that buy-in or that responsibility kind of assigned with that leadership or with the folks that are responsible for the governance over this stuff? And the second part of that question, I would say, is really, where do you find that companies do well and or kind of fall down on that issue? Ross, you want to take this one?
For me, it's, I'm not the person to tell you what to do with your company. I don't work in your company. I don't know your company. I don't have a magic crystal ball to see everything that happens there. And so I keep that in mind, that while I'm, doing the tabletop, I'm not the subject matter expert on everything. The people at your company are. And so I really try and lead the tabletop to get those discussions started so that the organization can realize what is working, what isn't working. I try and bring as many tools as I can to the table for them to use. That includes, bringing in someone from the blue side, having conversations both before and during. But it's really the organization's company, their cards. We're just here to help them realize what's strong, what's working, what's not working. It seems a little muddled, but I hope that answered your question.
No, that's dead on, man. That's great. Okay, we've got just a few minutes left for our webinar today. We've got some QA questions that have been previously asked that I'll throw at you guys, but as we're kind of going through this, if you're in the audience and you have additional questions or comments that you would like to have us chat about, please throw them into the Q&A section, and then we can kind of address those as we go. But to get us kicked off, first I would say, Craig, this is probably a good one for you. How do you balance the technical and the business-focused scenarios?
That's a good question. So we have to look at, so they are separate, but they're together still, right? So an executive-focused tabletop has an executive discussion based around it, right? We're not talking about tooling. We're not talking about different ransomware groups or things like that. We're talking about the overall business. How does it run? What are these large impacts that maybe you haven't thought about, or that you have thought about, but maybe not in depth? And then we can take that same sort of scenario that we come up with there and then dive deep into the technical. And on the technical side, as we do the tabletop, we're less focused on the business risk, right? We're focused on the technical aspect and how you would technically control this, but they are kind of the same thing, right? We're trying to solve the same problem, but it does take two different mindsets to get solved. So you have to have the executives dictate to IT what's important, and then from the IT side, that allows IT to dictate how you can control those incidents best. I'll say, I had a client one time that we would bring up, well, what about ransomware? And they just didn't care. Their data was in email, and if email was up, they could function for, as they noted, a long time. And so what would a ransomware scenario do? Why would we come with that, right? So So that those are the kind of discussions, and then we can focus on, 365 or wherever you have your email, and make sure that we get the right controls in place, get the right backups that are needed, things like that. Once we kind of understand those risks and what makes the business run.
I like it. That's good. Jim, how about you? What level of executive involvement do you think is necessary to make to have the largest impact and make this happen? I mean, is it something where we want to get every single C-level involved, or is there a balance that you found worked well for your organization?
I think it is important to have I guess okay, so I will say, like I said, we had the marketing people involved, we had the finance people involved. Another group I would have liked to had involved would have been HR.
Hmm.
Because if you're dealing with, potential inside threat actors, they have to, be able to respond and handle those kind of questions. And then perhaps even, our legal counsel, could have been involved as well, because there would have been other questions about the legality of, some of the things they did, are we going to be pursuing criminal charges, et cetera. Uh, so those, the four key aspects from the organization, I would like to see involved. It'd been great to have the CEO there just to kind of listen, but he got the executive summary, so he could review and follow up with questions if he had. But yeah, I think it's very important to have those groups, because it kind of holds up the tabletop. If you say, if it just was IT and Rasa goes and they're asking for $2 million ransom, and they go, what are you going to do? And be like, well, we're going to talk to finance, and then we just got to guess, and it brings it to a screeching halt.
Yep. No, that makes sense for sure. So essentially, the more the merrier, right? If we can, as long as
Very
they're
true.
key
Yes.
contributors within the business. Ross, how often should businesses be considering doing these exercises? I know that we have some clients that it's once a year because of their insurance requirement. We have other folks that we recommend quarterly. We even have had some folks that have really ran with this, and they're even taking the scenarios and executing internally like monthly. Where are your thoughts around how often a client should do this, and what should that look like?
Well, generally, at a bare minimum, once a year. And whether that be a full on bring us in tabletop or organize amongst yourself. But, those documents we write for what's going to go wrong in the worst way possible, we only ever look at two times otherwise, when we write them or when something's gone horribly wrong and we have to grab them and work our way out of it. And so reviewing all that type of documentation on a yearly basis is just a great habit to have, to make sure that they're up to date in case the worst does happen. Again, at least yearly on those, having a tabletop with someone come in from the outside to help you think through it is an amazing thing. And, depending on what your business is, how rapidly things are changing in your cyber landscape would really dictate how many you have. But I'd say once at a minimum, two would be great. And that way they're always up and going. But you always do have the issue of, yes, that's great, but we also have day-to-day operations and work. How do we balance those two things? And
Yep.
so, yeah, definitely once a year, more if you can, would be my recommendation.
Okay, excellent. Question from the audience. Person commented, they say that they see such a dire need for information to be known and available so that the leaders know what's available in their portfolio, but there's often a gap there, right? They have both, again, this is a school district, they have institutional technology as well as operational technology. It's kind of their comment is, it's the proverbial how do you eat the elephant dilemma, right? They feel overwhelmed by the lack of documentation awareness. It can feel a bit daunting. So they really want to understand where to start and how to make this a manageable effort. When you guys are making your recommendations coming out of these assessments, obviously you and Craig are creating these like top 10, kind of apply these things for the biggest wins within the organization. How do you prioritize those? What are the things that seem to make the biggest difference for the people who are receiving the report?
Um, it all goes back to the impact, right? And I answered a quick little bit there in the chat, but you have to get executives involved to tell you what matters, what the goal of the business, like in education, right? Teaching children. And so what makes teaching children happen, right? Generally you have a lot of online things, so you have your network infrastructure, and a lot of times that's the key, right? Keeping your network infrastructure going. And so when we look at a ransomware threat in a school that runs Chromebooks, maybe the ransomware threat isn't as big, right? Could be, but not all the time. So, can you come in on Monday, have a ransomware attack, but still teach children through the week while you work on it? Those are things that have to be decided at the top, and then down to IT, you can kind of document those processes, how you fix that, and then test that within your IR plan.
That's solid. That's really good. Jim, do you have anything you want to add to this before we move on to the next question?
No, I think that's pretty much
Pretty well covered. The last question we've really got today that has come in, is when we're talking about doing business with other businesses, right? The third-party vendor requirement. One of the challenges that the person in the Q&A has said is that they want to know how they should go about kind of forging and creating those business to business requirements and agreements with the various vendors who work with them. They shared a bit of an anecdote here where, they had an architect construction firm that they were working with get compromised, and all of the drawings and the project information ended up getting released. Obviously there's a lot of sensitive detail and data in there, especially if you're dealing like with schools or offices, finance, anything like that. One of the things that they were trying to do is understand the best way to really lay out a foundation or a path to make sure that they check the boxes and that they're requesting the right level of compliance or assurance from the different vendors that are out there. The three of you that are on the panel here, what are some of the things that you've seen that have been successful for other companies before when engaging with third-party vendors, and how is this something that we could work into an incident response tabletop, for example?
Well, for me, it goes back to the same thing of know your contracts, know what's already existing, because those are kind of the hard things for this is what work will be delivered. These are the protections that are being tasted. So by going back and reviewing those and then working through a tabletop assignment, for the next renegotiation, what you're going to need that contract to look like. And you're going to find that while you might not be familiar with the contract necessarily, you're going to find that the vendor might not be as well. Again, it's one of those things that's probably a boilerplate that's signed with every one of the vendors, either originated by them or by you. And it really doesn't have that life of what your actual scenario and day-to-day issues and priorities are going to be. So it's a great talking point. Schedule some time, discuss it with them. Doesn't have to be adversarial, doesn't have to be a full-on tabletop, but just pull it up, go over it line by line with them, and see what works for you and what needs to be changed in the future.
I like it. Q in the audience also said, we're not deciding whose work is more important. We're deciding what services have the biggest impact to the department or to the business. And I think that is a really good summary around how we assign priority and why this stuff is important in the way that we look at it. Jim, Craig, anything you wanted to add to that?
Sure. I know, this has kind of come up for us. And one of the things we have tried to start doing is when we're going to engage a new vendor, say, all right, do you have a SOC 2 report that we can review? Do you have any NIST certifications? And then, when we're dealing with the salesperson from that company, it's like, all right, here's a list of questions that we have, can we talk to someone in your security team if we need to? And it all kind of depends on the depth of the relationship. And sometimes, like if it's a large company like Microsoft, we're not going to be like, show me your SOC 2 report. We're going to, just, trust that they're secure. But smaller organizations, we, try to do our due diligence and investigate where they are from a security standpoint so that we can, gauge the appetite for risk.
Perfect.
Yep.
Craig, any
Yeah,
other
and you have
final comments?
you have to assign risk to those vendors, right? Salesforce, probably more important than Adobe, probably, but maybe not, right? And then within that risk, even if they give you their SOC 2, right, and they do all of the trusted criteria and it looks great, that doesn't mean that nothing will happen, right? So you still have to look at, can you, if something goes wrong in that scenario, what do you do? And if that's so impactful that maybe not having it in a cloud service or coming up with a backup, can you move to paper if it's down, right? Thinking those things through, because every report that you get and every assurance doesn't mean nothing will happen, right? So there's obviously that risk to that vendor still, and if it's a key process that costs you huge revenue per day, you just need to know, what will happen if that goes down.
That's excellent. All very good points, and thank you again for your feedback and your comments today, guys. I'll close with for the audience is go out and do some of this homework and some of the footwork yourself, right? Understand and find out, do you have an incident response plan? Is it in policy? Have you backed it with procedures? Are you happy with where it's at? And then have it tested. If it's something where you go through that process and you're finding that you have gaps or you don't have a formal policy, or maybe it's not something that's custom tuned for your specific business, reach out. We're happy to help. That's really what this is all about, is helping make aware the different services, the different solutions and the offerings that we have that can really help when we partner together. I think that, the easiest way to probably do that is to reach out to whoever your point of contact is within RedHelm. But also, please feel free to add the four of us that are on this panel on LinkedIn and reach out to us with any questions or follow-ups that you have as well. I really want to thank you all today. Thank you so much for your time. Those of you that are here on the panel, I know that your days are busy, and taking an hour like this to visit with folks is a large commitment of time. So thank you again. And I very much want to thank the audience, those of you who attended the webinar, as well as asking questions. If you're watching this as a recording, I hope that it was as valuable for you, but I would encourage you in future webinars that we do to jump in, participate, be part of our audience. The Q&As on this stuff in the back end, some of the stuff you guys can't see, is really beneficial, and where a lot of good questions get asked. All right, and with that, I'll thank you again for your time, and we'll wrap up our webinar today. Look forward to other upcoming webinars that we have, and keep in touch. Thank you all.